Hello there, it's Cassie and welcome back for another Heffy Doodle video. Today we are going to be making 4 cards. We're going to be focusing on night skies. We're using either colored cardstock or cardstock that we sponged. And let's talk about the products we're going to be using today. This first product is the My Little Angel stamp set, which is super adorable, along with the little matching dies. I love how most of those little angels, it cuts out their hands, which is fantastic. So you can put little things in there. We're also going to be using the Swirly Clouds die. And then we're going to be using the Twinkle stencil. I wanted to try doing some water through there, just different techniques with it, sponging color through there, and we'll see how that turns out. We're also going to be using the UR Heffy cuts along with the Angel Heffy cuts, and then we're also going to be using this Stargazer backdrop die, which I think is fantastic. So let's go ahead and get started with our sponged backgrounds. I have some watercolor cardstock and I've put this onto my waffle flower media mat because it kind of grips the paper. I'm sponging this piece of paper up using some Distress Oxide in the color Chipped Sapphire. I had cut this down to be the full front of an A2 size card, so it measures 4¼ inches by 5½ inches, so it is a perfect A2 size. And then I'm going to go ahead and do 2 panels just like that using that same color, clean up my mess, and then we're going to come in with a little bit of black soot Distress Oxide on the edges, and then we'll bring in that Chipped Sapphire to kind of blend that out just a little bit more. And we'll do that to both. So I thought it would be neat to have just a little bit of extra color on the outside so that it just wasn't a flat blue. But we're going to do a lot to these backgrounds, so hold on. All right, this first one, we're going to use that Stargazer backdrop die on it. I'm going to just run this through my die cutting machine. And in the process of that, I'm also going to run it through onto some Blueberry Bliss cardstock by Heffy Doodle. Because as I said before, I do want to do two backgrounds using some plain colored cardstock, and then 2 more doing the sponging. And I'm saving all those stars, so it'll punch out all those stars. You can save those and put those on other projects. Now I'm going to bring in the Twinkle stencil. I'm going to go ahead and tape my panel down to this stencil. And this wasn't as successful as I had wanted it to be, and you'll see why, and it's probably because maybe I should have played around with it a little bit more. But I'm going to take some paper towels. You could do this with like a baby wipe or something like that, but I'm going to spritz a bunch of water on there, and then I'm just going to dab that through the stencil, and it does do a good job of picking up the color. And you know, it probably was doing a much better job than I think it was doing, but I got impatient, which I typically do, so I sprayed water right on top of it, which probably would have been totally fine, except I kept spraying water on it and saturating it. So it ends up kind of seeping underneath the stencil just a little bit, so those stars aren't as stark as they probably could be. You can even see it if you look through some of those stars, how it just kind of is going to make those stars not so crisp, which is, you know, honestly, it's okay because I'm going to do a lot more to these backgrounds than what you're seeing here. Now for the Blueberry Bliss cardstock, I'm going to take some white pigment ink and I'm just going to pounce that through the stencil. This way I'll get a really nice crisp star image just using some white pigment ink. And that's a fun way to use your stencils as well. And then I'll just peel that off and then clean up my mess. But look at that, it looks pretty good. And you can already tell how different these backgrounds are going to be. Now for each of these backgrounds, I'm going to do some stuff. So this one, because it's water reactive with those Distress Oxides, I sprinkled a little water on that one. And then I'm going to bring in some Aqua pigment in the color Pearl. So this is basically a clear, but it has just bits of beautiful mica in it. So I'm going to splatter that all over all of the backgrounds. And then when it dries, it's going to have this beautiful shimmer to it, which is awesome. So I'm going to do that on all of the backgrounds. And this is where we're just going to go crazy doing things to the backgrounds. And in the end, especially, you know, you look at these backgrounds when you're first getting started and you're like, okay, all right, this looks all right. But then the more you do, I mean, I'm sure there's a point where you should probably stop, but the more I did, the more I fell in love with these backgrounds. Even that big giant blob, I really didn't mind that there. I thought that looked kind of cool. So again, just doing it all over all the backgrounds, because that looks pretty flat really with that star stencil on there. But once you start even adding more to make it look like more stars, I mean, I feel like that's just how it is when you're dealing with galaxy or sky, night sky backgrounds. Now I'm using some picket fences Distress paint. And now because I did use Distress Oxides on that, it will definitely dull down that white. It won't be so stark white. It'll absorb some of the color, but I was willing to take the chance. But it will obviously on this Blueberry Bliss cardstock, it's really just going to hold its color and it's going to be beautiful. And then I'm going to do that to all the backgrounds again. And then once we are done with that, that's where we'll stop. Because I did a pretty decent amount to these backgrounds. And then I'll definitely want to set these off to the side to dry because that Picket Fence Distress Oxide or Distress paint is permanent, which is why a splatter box is so important, because once it gets on something, you're not going to get it off very well. So I'm going to set these off to the side to dry. I'll kind of speed up the process just a little bit with my heat tool, but mostly I'm going to set these off to the side and kind of let them do their thing and just dry on their own while I work on the rest of the elements. We're going to go ahead and do our stamping. I've just picked out 2 of the little angels along with a heart, and I'm going to stamp that onto some very smooth white cardstock. I'm using some VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink because I don't plan to coat color this time. I want to do some colored pencils, and I thought that this would be the best way to do it. So all I'm doing is inking up those angels, and I'm turning my paper, and they fit perfectly on this square of paper that I just kind of had in my stash. And I do decide I need about 4 more of those hearts. So I'll just stamp out 4 more of those hearts using that same VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And then we'll get ready to do our coloring. So I'm going to do some colored pencils and Gamsol. And if you've never done that before, well, there you go. So I'll show you some of the coloring. I'm not going to show all of it to you simply because, it's just 2 of the same images 4 times. But I do use some different colors for the skin tone and different colors for the hair. We will end up having 4 different four sets of different angels. So we're using a dark brown on this first set, and then we're going to use that dark brown on their hair, moving over to these little angels. And as you can see, all I'm really doing is putting down a little bit of color, and then I'm going to bring in a little bit darker, just using that same color. You could absolutely bring in different colors if you wanted, like bring in an even darker brown. But because these images are fairly small, I didn't feel like it was necessary to go too crazy with darker colors. It would definitely have made them seem a little less flat, because in the end, with the Gamsol and everything else, they kind of flatten out just a little bit, but I do like the way these turned out. We're going to use some black on their hair. And then, again, adding some darker shades where I think that might look good. And you can definitely tell it looks like colored pencil right now, but when we bring in the Gamsol and the blending stump, that will change a little bit. So just coloring their hands, because I obviously, if you look at all my angels, I missed every one of them. So now we're bringing in some peach here for this little angel, or these 2 little angels. And then we're going to even bring in some other colors for these other 2. These ones are getting more of an auburn hair color. And like I said, most of the time I just use the same colored pencil, and that's where I add my darker shade with that. And then for their wings, the set of colored pencils that I have has some metallic colored pencils in there, so there are little bits of shimmer in this one. So I'm going to color all of their wings using this. It's more of like a little bit of a lavender metallic pencil. And then once I get all that, I'm going to go ahead and bring in some of that for their little, I don't know what you want to call it, their little dress maybe. Anyway, so I'm just bringing just some low lights with the dress. Now I'm bringing in the silver metallic for the cloud, and then the gold metallic for their halo. I end up loving how this ends up turning out. So then, as you can tell, my blending stump is very wet at the tip. That's because I dipped it right into the Gamsol. And then I am just kind of blending over the top. It's hard to tell on this little girl with such light colored hair and a light face, but as you can tell just a little bit, it definitely does blend out. So I'm going to do it on all those skin tones, and then I'll move on to the darker colors. And in between, you could file down your blending stump, or you might want to have different blending stumps for different colors. But you definitely like to keep your tip nice and pointed. That helps. So here you can see it's definitely blending out a lot better, and it's not looking quite so colored pencil-like, which is fun. I think that looks pretty good. And we'll do the same thing. I'll kind of wipe off my blending stump just a little bit on the open spaces of the paper, and then I'll blend out their hair. Doing the same thing with their little faces, and then blend out their hair. These little cuties ended up just being so fun. I could have colored a bunch more and tried even different techniques too. That would have been kind of fun. But I'm blending out their wings, and then I'm going to come in and blend a little bit on the clouds. Now that we're done with all of our coloring, we're going to bring in the matching dies, and we'll tack that down with a little bit of low tack tape and run that through my die cutting machine. I did miss it, but I stamped all the sentiments out onto some black cardstock using an embossing ink and then using some white embossing powder. I'm going to use my 3-inch Xyron sticker maker. I got this baby for Christmas from my mother-in-law, and so I'm very excited to be using it. And then I'll just peel off that release paper. The nice thing about this is it's turned that entire piece of Blueberry Bliss cardstock into a sticker. And that is awesome, especially when you're talking about using little dies like these, because they're fairly intricate. So just having a sticker maker for stuff like this works out so nicely. So I'm going to use the URN and Angel, and I'll run that through my die cutting machine 4 times. There was enough paper there for 4 times. I'll trim down all of my sentiments so that they all match pretty nicely. And then we'll get ready to start doing some assembly. But before I do that, I decide I want each of those little angels to be holding one of the hearts. That's the cool thing about these dies, is that it cuts out their little hands, or it cuts around them so that it can hold stuff. So I'm going to put a little heart in her hand. Actually, I'll put it in all of their hands. Isn't that adorable? So now she's holding a little heart. Oh. And then the same thing can be done with these little girls, because their little hands open up, and then I'll just put the heart right in between both of the hands so that it looks like she's holding the heart in her hands. I'm going to tack down my sentiment, just trying to line it up on my glass mat. And then we'll just do that right across the whole front of that panel. It's nice that these edges are a little bit longer, so that way I can just flip it over and then trim off all of the excess, and I'll do that for all 4 panels. And then we're going to go ahead and start laying it out. I didn't realize that my camera had stopped, but I'm going to glue down. How you see those clouds is how it's going to get glued down. But I do decide I want to pop up our little angel, so I'm actually going to run the matching die right through over the top of some fun foam, and it works perfectly. And then I'll just glue that right down to the back of her, and I'll do it for all 4 of the little angels that are going to be on the outside of the card. So they'll each be popped up on some foam, fun foam, which is a neat idea, and I think it takes a lot less time than just using foam tape. So there you go. Now for the inside of the card, we're going to glue down 1 more of those big swirly clouds along with an angel to go right on top of that. And then here is where that sticker paper comes in super handy. We'll peel off all of the release paper on each of the words. So here's the word U. And then we'll peel off the papers on R and N and Angel, and then we'll just line those right up. So that way it says you are an angel on the inside of the card. And then we'll take some of that same Nuvo Deluxe liquid glue and adhere down our panel to the front of our card base, which is just some heavyweight white cardstock. And I'll do that for all 4 of them. I love how that sentiment says, "Thank heavens you're in my life. You're an angel" on the inside there. I like that. And then I've just grabbed out some sequins that I had. And then I'm just going to put those all over randomly on the outside just to add even more sparkle and shine, like there's even more stars or planets or whatever you want to call it. And then we'll just tack that down using my Crystal Katana along with that Nuvo Deluxe liquid glue. And I'll do that for all 4 of them. And then that's going to finish off all of the cards. I love how these turned out. I think it's fun that we have these different backgrounds. It was fun to experiment using the Distress Oxide inks and making that background, and then just seeing what we could do with some plain cardstock. They all turned out so fun. So if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Share this with your friends if you'd like to. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you very soon in the next video. Goodbye, everybody.